Crowds gathered to watch Queen Victoria as she left Windsor station on her way to the castle. At 5:30 p.m, a dishevelled man brandishing a pistol stepped forward and fired a single shot directly at the Queen's carriage. It was the 2nd of March 1882, and Roderick Edward Maclean was 28 years old. The bullet missed. The Queen, her household, and everyone present were unharmed, and Maclean was immediately detained by police. On his way to the police station, he told Chief Superintendent Hayes that he had committed the crime because he was starving. A letter addressed to his sister was found in his pocket. It stated,
"I should not have done this crime had you, as you should have done, paid the 10 shillings per week instead of offering me the insulting small sum of 6 shillings per week and expecting me to live on it. So you perceive the great good a little money would have done, had you not treated me as a fool and set me more than ever against those bloated aristocrats led by that old lady Mrs. Vick, who is an accursed robber in all senses."
When told he was to be detained for shooting the Queen with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, Maclean remarked,
"Oh, the Queen,"
and apparently seemed more relieved to be in jail and have food. Maclean's attack was the 8th attempt on Queen Victoria's life, and the first in 10 years. In his statement to the police, he said,
"I'm not guilty of the charge of shooting with the intention of causing actual bodily harm. My object was by frightening the Queen to alarm the public, with the result of having my grievances respected. Such is the pecuniary straits in which I've been situated. All the circumstances tend to prove the statement. Firstly, had I desired to injure the Queen, I should have fired at her when she was quitting the railway carriage. Quite on the contrary, I pointed the pistol on a level with the wheels. But as I felt a slight kick, doubtless the contents may have lodged in one of the doors."
The government were quick to represent Maclean as mentally unstable. In the House of Commons, William Gladstone stated,
"Whereas in other countries similar execrable attempts have at least been made by men of average sense and intelligence, and whereas there the real, or at any rate the supposed cause, has been private grievances or public mischief, in this country, in the case of Her Majesty, they have been wholly dissociated from grievances, wholly dissociated from discontent, and upon no occasion has any man of average sense and average intelligence been found to raise his hand against the life of Her Majesty."
His message was clear. There was no rational cause or political grievance in Maclean's actions. However, in private, the government worried that the opposite was true. The previous year had seen a wave of Fenian bombings across Britain and the assassinations of Tsar Alexander II in Russia and President Garfield in the United States. Maclean, though, had a grievance. Ever since receiving a serious head injury as a teenager, he had lived with severe headaches and fits. While his parents were alive, they supported him with employment on his father's magazine, but by the time they'd both died in the late 1870s, he was left practically alone. His siblings sent him a few shillings every week, but his erratic behaviour and worsening health made it impossible to hold down a job. Manual labour worsened his symptoms, and so he was left in poverty, wandering from town to town. Maclean frequently entered local workhouses, and on one occasion, after failing to be admitted to one in Somerset, he deliberately smashed a window so he could spend the night in jail. He often wrote to his sister. In one letter sent in 1880, he expressed how disturbed he was by seeing people wearing blue. He believed it was his lucky colour, and people were wearing it to mock him. If they continued to do so, he would be driven to murder. His sister contacted local authorities and had him committed to the Bath and Somerset Lunatic Asylum, where he remained for 11 months until he was released as cured. After his release, his sister wrote to say she could no longer support him. This was a huge blow, as his brothers had also refused to send him any more money. Maclean also had political grievances, as testified by his landlord in Portsmouth. He would lecture her about politics and the economy. He was an admirer of Gladstone and a passionate supporter of the radical politician Charles Bradlaugh, an advocate of republicanism. The Home Secretary, William Vernon Harcourt, ordered the head of the Metropolitan Police's Criminal Investigations Department to investigate any anarchist links Maclean may have had. Harcourt had received a letter claiming that Maclean had connections with Johann Most, a German anarchist living in London who had called for royal assassinations, but no such links could be found. The prosecution began looking for evidence that Maclean was insane, willfully ignoring how poverty and hunger had motivated his actions. McLean was exasperated with how he was treated by his family and society. He felt that the bloated aristocrats, of which Queen Victoria was the figurehead, had conspired to keep him poor and hungry. A social outcast, McLean lashed out. McLean left Portsmouth, selling his scarf and concertina to his landlady, and used the money to buy a cheap pistol and pinfire bullets. He walked the 55-mile journey to Windsor and arrived on the 25th of February, 1882. He secured lodgings after pleading with the landlady to be allowed to pay 1 shilling in advance and the rest once his sister sent his allowance, an allowance that would never arrive. A week later, he made his way to Windsor Station to assassinate the Queen. A dock was hastily built overnight, and the very next day, McLean was tried at Windsor Guildhall. At the trial, McLean cross-examined witnesses himself, pointing out that none of them had seen where his pistol was pointed.
If you have ever fired a pistol, perhaps you're aware that pistols jump. Just because you had seen my gun pointing towards the Queen after I had fired does not mean that I was positioned there when I had fired. None of the witnesses had seen me point the gun before firing. That is a point in my favour.
McLean was tried twice at the Guildhall on the 3rd and 10th of March. Having been declared sane by a local surgeon on the night of the attempted assassination, the magistrates decided there was enough evidence to charge him with treason. At the third trial at the Berkshire Assizes, McLean's state of mind became the focus. Rather than acknowledge the possibility that poverty, hunger, and Republican leanings might have motivated McLean's attack, it suited the prosecution and the government to simply argue that the gunman was a mentally unstable lone wolf.
If the prisoner should be held to be so insane as to be entitled to an acquittal, satisfaction would be felt by every subject of the Queen at the thought that it was not from the ranks of those who were sane that a hand has been raised against our gracious sovereign.
The defence agreed.
The character of the present gracious occupant of the throne was such that it was impossible to imagine that any sane person could be found so hideously vile as to commit the offence with which the prisoner stood charged.
A not guilty by way of insanity verdict would be received with feelings of relief by the whole nation.
The presiding judge, Lord Chief Justice Coleridge, summed up the case by explaining that if a person was insane, while they could commit criminal acts, they could not be found guilty of them.
From the earliest times, the law had always distinguished between persons capable of committing offences and persons incapable in law of committing them. The latter class might commit prohibited acts, yet the law, in consequence of their mental incapacity, refrained from affixing to those acts criminal consequences.
Roderick Maclean was tried at the Berkshire Assizes on the 19th of April 1882 and found not guilty by way of insanity after the jury deliberated for 5 minutes. Queen Victoria was outraged. By acquitting Maclean, she believed that her government had failed to protect her, and she demanded that her Prime Minister, William Gladstone, find a way to remove not guilty on the grounds of insanity from law. The Queen considered Maclean sane and worried that an acquittal would encourage other attempts on her life. Gladstone met with the Attorney General and Lord Chief Justice to discuss his belief that
the stigma of guilt would prevent dangerous misapprehensions in morbid minds.
The law was quietly changed in August 1883. The Trial of Lunatics Act changed the verdict from not guilty by way of insanity to guilty but insane. The sentence was not changed, and such individuals would still be detained as criminal lunatics, but they would now be considered morally responsible for their actions. This verdict, which was not applied in Scotland, remained in place for over 80 years. Not guilty by reason of insanity was reapplied in 1961 in Northern Ireland under the Mental Health Act and 1964 in England and Wales under the Criminal Procedure Act. Roderick Maclean was transferred to Broadmoor Asylum. He wrote 2 letters to the Home Secretary petitioning for his release, but his pleas for mercy were unsuccessful. He remained locked away until his death on the 8th of June 1921.
To the Right Honourable Sir W.V. Harcourt MP. Thus, as the humble petitioner of R.E. McLean, incarcerated in Broadmoor Asylum on a charge of high treason at Windsor, I, the humble petitioner, prayeth that you may be as leniently inclined as to extend mercy to the humble petitioner R.E. McLean, and in your wisdom, see the expediency of restoring the petitioner to society if necessary, conditionally that I, the petitioner, agrees to leave England, either for Australia or one of the other colonies, and not to return.